On any road trip, it is with much certainty that the one thing you'll encounter is a road sign. A sign that will tell you where you're going and sometimes where you've been. The historic Route 66 proved to be an inspiration for this program, as 1966 was pretty much a crossroads for the Barbie brand. That year marked an innovation in the world of Barbie, and the original family as we know it was established, adding in Francie, Tootie, and Todd to the ever-growing Barbie family. Barbie's classic bob hairstyle, called the American Girl, was inspired by many of the actresses of the time that sported the same hairdo. 1966 was a year of innovation, as the patent filed for the bendable leg mechanism was granted. And the lifelike bendable legs gave Barbie a whole new look. There were 23 new fashions available for Barbie and Midge in 1966, a reduction in number from the previous year. However, there was not a reduction in available product, as Francie and Tootie both had additional fashions for purchase. And the styles, they were a-changing. 1966 would prove to be a test market year to see how some of the mod styling would perform on the toy shelves. Though this test market would not be on Barbie, it would actually be on her new cousin, Francie. Francie personified a new look, had a new formula for her vinyl, and had rooted eyelashes. Her success that year paved the way for new innovation in the future of the Barbie brand. 1966 was also a year of acquisition. Mattel would acquire Standard Plastic Products. This company had manufactured much of Mattel's vinyl products over the course of years and would now be under the Mattel umbrella. This created an innovation in the look and styling of Barbie's houses, as they changed from their cardboard structures into these wonderful case-style Barbie houses. Innovation continued to happen at Mattel. Shown is a photograph of a brainstorming session in action. Jack Ryan is seated on the right, surrounded by his counterparts. The only woman at the table is Charlotte Johnson, the original Barbie designer and perhaps the most important contribution to any doll project. Let's take a moment to remember the humble beginnings of the Barbie doll and how far we've come in just 7 years. So let's leave 1966 and head out on our road trip. We're going to discover some of the directions that were taken by some of Barbie's innovators. We'll be stopping in Hawthorne, California, the original home of Mattel Toys. Founded by Ruth and Elliot Handler, Ruth was the brainchild behind the Barbie doll. And if we're going to follow an iconic path, we have to make a stop in Bel Air. This was the home of Jack Ryan. While working with Mattel, Ryan would receive 1.5% commission on every toy that was sold that was under a patent that he created. He would use these millions of dollars to turn his Bel Air mansion into a castle. Mattel had been a million-dollar toy company before the introduction of Barbie. However, at the time Barbie was introduced, they started establishing record profits every year. This bar chart from 1959 shows how the art doll category outperformed every other category of toy at Mattel. This information has recently been discovered in the archive file of a former accountant that worked for Mattel Toys from 1962 to 1972. During this time of record growth, Mattel would establish itself as the second largest organization for girls with the Barbie Fan Club. This all pushed Mattel into the right direction for 1967. 1967 was the affirmation that the test marketing with the Francie doll was correct, and Barbie received an updated new look for that year with the twist and turn waist, which was a patent held by Jack Ryan. Francie and Barbie would also receive new friends with Stacy and Casey, and Chris would become Tootie's new friend. And some brilliant marketing created the trade-in program for the Twist and Turn Barbie. You could now bring your outdated Barbie to the store and trade her in for $1.50 to get the new updated Barbie. 1968 was an amazing year at Mattel and was full of new and interesting products. The talking mechanism used for Chatty Cathy had been shrunk down to fit inside of a Barbie body, so Barbie and her friends were now talking. Also that same year, Mattel introduced their tiny toy car called Hot Wheels, one of the best-selling toys of the season. These successes put Mattel right in the fast lane. Inspired by the customized cars seen around California, there were 16 different vehicles available that first year, which would increase Mattel's sales by 40% in 1969. With a hot toy on their hand, Mattel ramped up production for these cars and increased the number available in 1969 by 24. There were many young collectors of these Hot Wheel cars that had to have every single one produced. And thousands of miles of orange plastic track for them to ride on were sold. And what's hotter than the Hot Wheels? How about Mattel's Sizzlers? These little cars were the same size as the Hot Wheels cars. However, they held a tiny battery pack that powered them to move on their own across the floor. This was made possible by the juice machine, a sort of gas pump for these little cars that had to be hooked up to it to be powered. It was sold separately and was a necessary addition if you were going to have a set of Sizzlers. For both Hot Wheels and Sizzlers, the production was increased. However, the one thing that went unnoticed at Mattel was a saturation point. In 1970, Mattel would have a series of setbacks and losses that were not reported. Feeling that these losses were temporary, Ruth Handler and her colleagues devised a plan that would at least disguise these losses and their reports of financials. This was sort of a recipe for disaster. They filled tractor trailers full of slow-moving merchandise and drove them over to Industry City where they were parked. And they parked a lot of these over in Industry City. When these were driven off of the Mattel loading dock, they were added as accounts receivable on their books. As I described it as a recipe for disaster, it's also a recipe for cooking the books. However, they were hoping that some of their new plans and innovations would get them out of this sticky situation quickly. Mattel had built their business selling directly to toy stores and department stores, but they were hoping to expand their market by selling to other type vendors. This included drugstores and grocery stores where some of their competitors had already established their market. Having begun to establish manufacturing in other countries, Mattel was hoping to move their factories from Japan to areas like Taiwan and Hong Kong, where the cost of labor would be less expensive. Faced with relocating their manufacturing, Charlotte Johnson proposed an idea to utilize existing fabric inventories. This would be utilized for Barbie's new fashion designs. It would eliminate current fabric stock and incur no additional new costs. These fashion sets were proposed to Sears and sold through their wish book. Two sets were available for Barbie, a set for Francie and Skipper, and one was available for Ken. The Fashion Bouquet set and Glamour Group were discussed in our video with Ken Jabert on our Florida destination. These sets were created with existing fabrics from previously created Barbie garments with a few new fabrics thrown in. These sets were full of mix and match possibilities and were full of variations. The Pretty Power set for Francie and the Young Ideas set for Skipper also were full of many varied fabrics and colors. But the fun didn't stop with Sears. There were many variations utilizing existing fabrics available in the Barbie line, including these mod fashion packs. Available in 1970, a knit dress called Sharp Shift utilized vintage fabrics from as far back as 1966. And the Cool Casuals cotton halter top and pants used up lots of vintage fabric from Color Magic all the way to Francie's Belle's outfits. We'll pause on a journey in 1971. It was a year of meager sales and unreported losses as well. The toys that were offered that year were often rehashes of previous ideas. In 1972, Mattel would offer Big Jim, their answer to the action figure category on the boys' aisle of the toy department. It was in direct competition with Hasbro's 12-inch G.I. Joe figure, hoping to create a new industry standard by the smaller 10-inch size. Mattel utilized this opportunity to market to boys and girls on different aisles of the toy store by offering them essentially the same product, just packaged and painted differently. The Country Camper, the Barbie Friendship, and the Country Living Home were both turned into structures and vehicles for Big Jim. While this saved money on tooling and decreased manufacturing costs, it did not, however, answer any of Mattel's financial problems. It seemed that no matter what they did, they were still being outperformed by lesser quality manufacturers like Schillman and Mego. During this time, the packaging evolves. Previously, the fashions had been sewn to a card, placed in a cellophane bag, and then boxed. Now, they were literally attached to a card with a sticky adhesive and then encased in a bubble. Although this presented challenges, Charlotte Johnson and her team rose to the occasion. These lesser expensive fashions were called Best Buys and were at a price point that was similar to their competitors. The fabrics that were utilized during this time were purchased in such a large quantity in order to get the best price. Therefore, the fabrics were used across the line for every character and in most cases, some other dolls that were not part of the Barbie family. And if there was ever an affirmation that they were headed in the wrong direction, it would be the 1972 Annual Shareholder Report. It shared a plan of acquisition and rapid growth, including the purchase of Ringling Brothers Barnum Bailey Circus and the Turco company that created playground equipment, Metaframe that created aquarium equipment and the little plastic plants that went inside your aquarium, Monogram Models, the Superstar and Signal company that made model airplanes, and the Octagon Organ Company. Jack Ryan had helped develop the Octagon organ. It had pre-recorded sounds and percussion, and you played the melody. Those acquisitions all proved to be a liability, and it was a matter of time before their financial misgivings were discovered. And with any road trip, sometimes you could end up going the wrong way, as it was for Ruth Handler. With the nightmare unveiled, the Securities Exchange Commission gets involved. And for lack of a better analogy, they throw Ruth Handler under the bus. However, she maintains a happy face and stays involved with much of the PR of the introduction of Barbie's Sweet 16. She traveled to Toy Fair that year for the Barbie birthday celebration and the renaming of 6th Avenue as Barbie Boulevard. The legal battle would continue, and she would plead no contest and would be fined $57,000 by a judge, and she was sentenced to 2,500 hours of community service, the largest community service sentence ever handed down at the time. The handlers were ousted at Mattel, but the nightmare continued for the toy company, and it seemed to only continue to get worse. Jack Ryan would leave Mattel and begin his own legal battle with the toy company to receive what he considered to be unpaid royalties. Mattel would finally settle with him, paying him $11 million of the $20 million he felt he was owed. With Mattel hurting, they set out to find ways to economize yet once again and compete with their off-brand competitors. They would do this by offering dolls sold in simple baggies, similar to some of the off-brands that were sold in inexpensive dime stores. They utilized unboxed dolls, dolls that had never been packaged, and factory-returned talking dolls that never talked. This was very popular with discount retailers. The method of displaying these type doll on the peg hook was an industry standard in that type of setting. So I know what you're thinking. Bradley, what happened with all of that inventory that Mattel drove over to Industry City and parked in those tractor trailers? Well, after a couple years, it was discovered and was sold at discount prices to many different retailers. That's why when you look at some of the offerings in Mattel dealer catalogs, you'll see some outfits that were available from 71 and 72, and then skip a year and were available in 74. That's when they were reintroduced as a new product or an existing product in their dealer catalog. And because most of the fashions that were discovered in that inventory were for Francie and Casey, Mattel created an inexpensive version of Francie and Casey as baggy dolls. These dolls were created for this purpose and were not pre-existing dolls repackaged. The 1975 Baggy Francie and Baggy Casey dolls were the last time that we saw Francie as part of the official Barbie line. What happened to Francie? When she was introduced in 1966, there was a big difference between a 15 or 16-year-old girl and an 18-year-old girl like Barbie would have been. An 18-year-old would have been expected to have a job and get married. Francie was far more interested in soda fountains and dance parties. By the time we arrive in 1975, there's very little difference between a 16-year-old girl like Francie and an 18-year-old girl like Barbie. They're pretty much leading the same lives. It's determined that the dolls are too similar, and based on budgetary concerns and the current economic crisis that the world is in, that the doll will be eliminated and future friends of Barbie will be the same size. The 70s are a very sporty time for Barbie. Once again, all the equipment that's being created for her is also being utilized by Big Jim. At a time of inflation and an energy crisis, the creators at Mattel decide that Barbie needs to take a vacation. During this time of business uncertainty, Mattel seemed to be stuck in a roundabout pattern. They were determined to continue to repeat products that had successfully sold in the past, repackaging them as a new idea. So she can go camping in her Barbie country camper. And if the price of gas is too high, she can camp out in the backyard in her campout tent. And Francie gets in on the camping fun as well with her Get Ups and Go outfit that comes complete with backpack and sleeping bag. You could always take the beach bus down to the beach and go camping. And if there weren't enough ways for Barbie to go camping, let's go camping again with her dune buggy and pop-up camper. And if you ever get tired of camping, you can always do something sporty, like participate in the Olympics. Here are some of the Olympic dolls from 1975 to commemorate the 1976 Olympics. They created this variety of dolls through a licensing agreement with the official Olympic brand. And Mattel had become reactionary in its design, creating a product simply to compete with another product done by a similar company. This is the case with Dusty, the sporty doll created by Kenner. It was a matter of time before free-moving Barbie was created to compete. The free-moving mechanism was an invention of Jack Ryan, and the dolls could play tennis, golf, and a variety of other actions. With all this outdoorsy fun, camping, and sporting, the Barbie line was lacking some sophistication and glamour. European retailers even requested from Mattel to do more sophisticated and glamorous fashions. And then, in 1977, something exciting happened. Disco became the craze. Glamour returned, and it was inspired by a lot of television variety shows with like Donnie and Marie, and it was a brilliant time for Barbie to get an update. This shift in pop culture offered something more than just camping. It offered glamour, and it was delivered straight to our television screens and ultimately showed up in the Barbie line. The new superstar Barbie and Christie had a new look, a head sculpt created by Joyce Clark. These dolls proved to be an innovative and brilliant new way to bring glamour to Barbie. It also exposed some differences of the creators at Mattel. It becomes very apparent that the men are more driven by gimmick and engineering, and the women are more understanding of what little girls wanted with fashion and creating an imaginative play pattern. Many times these dolls with heavily themed engineered features are short-lived and in most cases flop. But something is discovered during this time period that varies from what they originally conceived. The original concept was much like the razor blade concept. They would sell you the doll at a nominal cost, and then you would want to buy the fashions, which were more profitable. The original plan for every Barbie doll sold, there would be an additional 4 fashions sold as well. However, in the 1980s, it was determined that it was far more profitable to sell a doll. So therefore, they began marketing more and varied dolls. Mattel also stated that the average little girl at the time owned 8 Barbie dolls. However, in my opinion, the one single thing that really turned the Barbie brand around in 1977 was when Mattel hired Kitty Black Perkins. Perkins had never had a Barbie doll of her own as a child. Kitty's dolls were some of the best-selling Barbies of all times, and each one of them included an immense amount of play value. Each one of them included a mix-and-match fashion or a transformative outfit. When I spoke to her in 2018 and asked her about these incredible dolls, she told me that she wanted that if it was the only doll that a little girl ever got, it had everything that she could have ever dreamed of having in that one toy. And with the glamour of Barbie restored, the real estate that she lived in was through the roof. Her dowdy townhouse was replaced by the amazing 2-story A-frame dream house. This house was an amazing structure and one of the priciest products in the Barbie line at the time. The 80s were a transformative time for the Barbie brand. Sales increased and grew, and Mattel became a billion-dollar company by the end of the decade. Mattel as a company had made it through a very dark period in its history, and had come out all the better. It was during this time that they discovered that there were actually collectors of the Barbie doll, and they began, for the first time, marketing collector dolls directly to adult collectors. Though Mattel and Barbie had gone through a very bleak and dark time, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. Late 80s and into the early 90s, Mattel moved into an era of not only selling on the children's toy aisle, but also to adult collectors, and beginning an era of an amazing time in the history of the brand. And they say time heals all wounds. And after a period of time had passed, many forgot Ruth's indiscretion from the 1970s, and she became the superwoman we all loved and adored. Ruth Handler would divest of her Mattel stock in 1980 and would continue to run the Ruthven Corporation, which manufactured prosthetic breasts, having herself been a breast cancer survivor. In 1993, she would be invited back and be a Barbie ambassador for Mattel. So when Barbie's out taking a spin in her Austin Healey, she'll look to a road sign to determine which way she needs to go. And I think she'll be making a right turn, straight to iconic status. Over the course of history, so many people played a vital role in the development and creation of so many of the amazing Barbie dolls that we know and love. No matter how small a role each of these people played, it really cemented that the brand of Barbie will always endure and always be a favorite and always be in my collection. Those same people really put Mattel on the map. The most recent news affirmed that Barbie is not only the best doll on our planet, she is the best doll in the universe, finally, officially traveling to outer space.